I did not believe in vampires. Not in 1872. Not in the village they sent me to. And definitely not in the stories about something that could live inside a man without him knowing. But the first night I slept there, I woke up already standing, outside, barefoot in the mud, and I was breathing, like something was listening for it. If you are watching this right now, I need you to do something simple. Just for a moment, hold your breath. Because what we found in that village, it did not chase you. It waited. And when you finally breathed in again, that is when it entered you. So before you go any further, subscribe. Because the rest of this story was never meant to be told. And if I stop talking at any point, you will understand why. I remember the road into the village far too clearly. Not because it was remarkable, but because of how unremarkable it tried to appear. The path was narrow and uneven, cutting through a stretch of forest that seemed older than anything I had ever seen, as if the trees themselves had been standing long before anyone thought to name the place. There were no signs, no markers, nothing to confirm that I was even heading in the right direction, and yet the man who sent me insisted there was nowhere else it could be. By the time I arrived, the sun had already begun its slow descent behind the hills, casting a dim amber light that clung to the rooftops and made every structure look like it had been abandoned decades ago. The houses were still standing, but there was something in the way they leaned, something in the way the doors remained slightly open, as if the entire village had exhaled and never bothered to inhale again. I stepped inside the first house I saw, expecting silence, but what I found instead was something far worse. The air felt occupied, not heavy, not stale, but aware in a way that made my chest tighten without reason. I told myself it was just the journey, that I had not eaten properly, that my body was reacting to exhaustion. But that explanation did not hold when I realized I had been holding my breath without noticing it. The moment I inhaled, the sound echoed back at me, not loudly, not in a way that could be easily explained, but just enough to make me question whether the breath I had taken was entirely my own. I left the house immediately after that, stepping back into the fading light, hoping that the open air would settle whatever unease had begun to form inside me. That was when I saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of the road, watching me without moving. They did not approach and they did not speak, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way they stood there, as if they had been waiting for me specifically. I raised a hand in greeting, attempting to break the tension, but none of them returned the gesture. Instead, one of them took a slow, deliberate step forward, just enough for me to see his face more clearly. He looked normal, tout normal. There were no signs of illness, no visible wounds, nothing that would explain the stories I had been told before arriving here, and yet there was something missing in his expression, something hollow that I could not immediately define. His eyes were open, focused, but they lacked the subtle movement that every living person carries without thinking. He was watching me, but he was not reacting to me. Before I could say anything, he spoke. "You should not breathe so freely here." The sentence was delivered calmly, almost gently, but the meaning settled into me with a weight I could not ignore. I tried to laugh it off, to respond in a way that would keep the situation grounded in something logical, but the words caught in my throat before they could fully form. "Why not?" I managed to ask. The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering whether I was worth answering, and then he did something I will never forget. He inhaled, slowly, deeply, and as he did, I felt it. A sudden tightness in my chest, sharp and immediate, as if the air around me had been pulled away for just a fraction of a second. It was brief, so brief that I could have dismissed it entirely if it had not been for the way the other 2 figures reacted. They did not move toward me, and they did not look at me, but their bodies shifted ever so slightly, as if something invisible had just passed through the space between us. The man exhaled, and the tension in my chest released just as quickly as it had come. "You will understand soon enough," he said, and then they turned, all 3 of them, and walked back into the village without another word. I stood there alone, trying to convince myself that what I had just experienced had a rational explanation, that it was nothing more than coincidence or suggestion. But deep down, I already knew that something in this place did not follow the rules I had spent my entire life trusting. That night, as I prepared to sleep in one of the empty houses, I made a decision that felt small at the time. I told myself I would pay attention to my breathing. I did not yet understand that it was already too late for that. I did not fall asleep in the way a person normally does, and that was the first thing that truly began to unsettle me. There was no gradual fading of awareness, no soft drift into unconsciousness, but rather a sudden absence, as if something had simply removed the moment between being awake and being gone. 1 second I was lying on the rough wooden floor, staring at the ceiling and listening to the faint creaking of the house around me, and the next I was standing outside. The cold hit me immediately, sharp and grounding, but it did not bring the relief I expected. My feet were bare, pressed into damp earth that felt freshly disturbed, and for a brief moment I could not understand how I had gotten there. I turned slowly, scanning the darkness, trying to piece together the missing time, but the village around me remained silent in a way that felt deliberate. Then I heard it, breathing, not mine. It came from somewhere behind me, low and steady, too controlled to belong to someone who was unaware of their presence. I turned quickly, expecting to see one of the villagers standing just out of reach, but there was no one there. The space was empty, and yet the sound continued, circling me in a way that made it impossible to determine its origin. I tried to steady myself, forcing my own breathing to slow, to match the rhythm I was hearing. But the moment I did, the sound changed. It adjusted, it became synchronized, and that was when the fear truly began. Because it was not just following me, it was learning me. I stepped back, then forward, testing whether the sound would remain consistent. But each movement I made was mirrored in a way that felt too precise to be coincidence. The air itself seemed to shift around me, subtle but undeniable, as if something unseen was positioning itself in response to my presence. "Who is there?" I called out, my voice louder than I intended. The breathing stopped, not gradually, not fading into silence, but cut off completely, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than any sound I had heard before. I waited, straining to hear anything that might explain what was happening, but the village offered nothing in return. And then, without warning, I felt it, a breath against the back of my neck, warm, close, impossible. I froze, every instinct in my body telling me to run, but something deeper held me in place, something that understood, on a level I could not fully articulate, that movement would make things worse. "You are not from here," a voice whispered, so close that I could feel the shape of the words against my skin. I turned slowly, forcing myself to confront whatever stood behind me, but once again, there was nothing there. The space was empty, the darkness uninterrupted, and yet the presence remained, pressing in on me from all sides. "You breathe too loudly," the voice continued. I tried to respond, but my throat tightened, refusing to cooperate. And for the first time since arriving in the village, I became acutely aware of something I had never once questioned before. The sound of my own breathing. It was uneven, uncontrolled, too human. The realization settled into me with a clarity that felt almost violent. Whatever this was, it did not need to see me. It only needed to hear me. I forced myself to take a slow, shallow breath, trying to minimize the sound, trying to make myself smaller in a way that might go unnoticed. But the moment I did, the presence shifted again, closer, interested, encouraged. And that was when I understood the mistake I had just made. It did not hunt the breath itself. It hunted the attempt to control it. "You will learn," the voice whispered again, softer this time, almost patient. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The pressure lifted, the air around me returning to something that resembled normal, and I found myself alone once more, standing in the same spot where I had woken. I did not sleep again that night. Instead, I sat inside the house, back against the wall, counting every breath I took, trying to keep them steady, trying to keep them quiet, and most of all, trying to ignore the growing certainty that something inside this village had already begun to recognize me. And worse than that, it had started to listen. By the time the first light of morning reached the edges of the village, I had not closed my eyes once. I remained seated against the wall, counting each breath with a precision that bordered on obsession, as if losing track of that rhythm would somehow expose me to whatever had been standing behind me the night before. The silence inside the house had not been empty, but watchful, and I could not shake the feeling that something had remained close, listening to me even after it had disappeared. When I finally stepped outside, the village looked unchanged, but I was not the same person who had arrived the day before. The air felt different now, not because it had shifted, but because I was aware of it in a way I had never been before. Every inhale carried weight, and every exhale felt like something I was giving away, without fully understanding to whom. The three figures I had seen the previous evening were already standing in the road, as if they had never left. They did not greet me, and they did not ask where I had been, but their attention fixed on me immediately, drawn not by my presence, but by something else, my breathing. I forced myself to remain calm, to keep my movements controlled, but the moment I stepped closer, I saw it more clearly than before. They were not breathing, at least not in any way that resembled what I knew. Their chests did not rise, and their shoulders did not shift, and yet they stood there without strain, without discomfort, as if the need for air had been removed from them entirely. "You noticed," the same man said, his voice carrying no emotion, only quiet certainty. I hesitated before answering, aware that even the smallest reaction could betray me. "You are not breathing," I said carefully. The man's expression did not change, but something in his posture adjusted, subtle enough that I might have missed it if I had not been watching so closely. "We breathe when it allows us," he replied. The sentence settled into me with a weight I could not immediately process. "What does that mean?" I asked. For a moment I thought he would not answer, but then he turned slightly, gesturing toward one of the nearby houses. "Come," he said. I followed, not because I trusted him, but because I understood that refusing would leave me alone with questions that I could not afford to carry any longer. The house he led me into was darker than the others, its windows covered from the inside, allowing only the faintest traces of light to enter. The air inside felt still, but not empty, and I immediately recognized the same awareness I had felt the night before. There was someone inside. At first, I did not see him, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized he was sitting in the far corner of the room, his back pressed against the wall, his body completely still. "Do not speak loudly," the man beside me said. I nodded, lowering my voice instinctively, though I was not entirely sure why. The man in the corner looked at me, and the moment our eyes met, I understood what the others had lost. He was still breathing, not steadily, not calmly, but desperately, as if each breath required effort, as if something was actively resisting him. "How long?" I asked quietly. The man beside me did not answer immediately. "3 nights," he said eventually. I felt a cold tension settle into my chest. "What happens after that?" The man in the corner inhaled sharply, the sound louder than anything else in the room, and for a brief moment, the air seemed to tighten around us. "That is what we are showing you," the man beside me replied. The figure in the corner tried to speak, but his voice broke before the words could form. His breathing became uneven, shallow, and then suddenly forced, as if something invisible had taken hold of it. I took a step forward without thinking. "Do not move," the man beside me said immediately, but it was too late. The moment I shifted my weight, the man in the corner froze completely, his body locking into place, as if something had just passed through him. Then he inhaled, once, deeply, and after that he did not move again. The room fell silent. Not the kind of silence that comes naturally, but something absolute, something that removed even the memory of sound. I stared at him, waiting for some sign of life, some indication that what I had just witnessed had an explanation I could understand, but there was nothing. "He is still here," the man beside me said. I turned to him slowly. "What do you mean?" The man's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had arrived, I saw something in them that resembled warning. "It does not take you all at once," he said. "It waits inside you until you stop being able to hear yourself." I did not leave the house immediately after that, and I think part of me already knew that stepping back outside would not bring any sense of normality with it. The man in the corner remained exactly as he was, his body upright, his eyes open, but whatever had made him human had clearly been removed in a way that left something else behind. I found myself watching him longer than I should have, waiting for a movement that never came, hoping for a breath that would prove this was not what it appeared to be. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that the absence of that movement was not a pause. It was permanent. "We should go," the man beside me said quietly. I followed him back outside, but the air no longer felt like an escape. If anything, it felt thinner, as if something had already begun to take notice of me again. "What is it?" I asked once we were alone in the road. The man did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was lower than before, as if even speaking carried risk. "It is not what you think," he said. "That does not help me," I replied, my patience beginning to fracture. He stopped walking and turned toward me, and for the first time, there was something in his expression that resembled urgency. "It is not a creature that comes from outside," he said. "It is something that enters." I felt a slow, creeping realization begin to form, one that I did not want to fully accept. "You mean it is inside the people here?" I said. The man shook his head. "No," he replied. "It is inside the breathing." The words did not make sense at first, not in any way that aligned with the world I understood. But the memory of the previous night returned immediately, the feeling of something adjusting to me, synchronizing with me, learning me. "It listens," he continued, "and when it learns your rhythm, it waits." "For what?" I asked. "For the moment you cannot control it anymore." I felt my chest tighten again, not from lack of air, but from the awareness of it. "What happens then?" I said. The man's gaze did not waver. "It takes over the space between your breaths," he said. "And once it is there, you are no longer the one deciding when to breathe." A cold understanding settled into me. "That is why you told me not to breathe freely," I said. The man nodded. "You give it more to learn from when you are careless," he replied. I tried to slow my breathing again, to regulate it in a way that would make it less noticeable, but the moment I focused on it, I felt it, a shift, subtle but unmistakable. Something had responded. I froze, holding my breath without thinking, and for a moment, everything felt still. Then, slowly, something exhaled. Not me, not anyone around me, but something close enough that I felt it brush past my face. The man stepped back immediately. "You see now," he said. I did not respond, because there was nothing left to say. Whatever this was, it was already here. And worse than that, it had already started to recognize me. I did not speak after that, because every instinct in my body told me that even the smallest disruption could draw more attention than I was already receiving. The man walked ahead of me without looking back, as if he expected me to follow, and I did, not out of trust, but because standing still felt more dangerous than moving forward. We entered another house, one that appeared more intact than the others, with its door fully closed and its windows uncovered, allowing daylight to reach inside without obstruction. For a brief moment, I felt something close to relief, because the space looked normal, almost untouched, and I wanted to believe that not everything in this village had been claimed by whatever force we were dealing with. That illusion did not last. "There are still some who can resist longer," the man said as he stepped aside, allowing me to see further into the room. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I noticed her. A woman sitting at a wooden table, her hands resting flat against the surface, her posture perfectly upright, as if she had been placed there rather than having chosen to sit. Her eyes moved when I entered, tracking me with a level of awareness that felt too sharp, too focused, and yet something about her expression told me that awareness was not entirely her own. "She is still breathing," I said quietly. The man nodded. "For now," he replied. I stepped closer, careful with every movement, aware of the sound of my own breathing in a way that made each inhale feel louder than it should have been. The woman's gaze shifted slightly as I approached, not following my face, but my chest, as if she were measuring something I could not see. "Do you know what is happening to you?" I asked. Her lips parted, and for a moment I thought she would not answer, but then she inhaled slowly, deliberately, and spoke. "It is learning me," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something strained, as if each word had to pass through something else before it reached me. "How long have you been like this?" I asked. She did not respond immediately, and when she finally did, her answer was not directed at me. "It waits between them," she said, her eyes unfocused for a brief moment. I felt a tightening in my chest again, not from fear alone, but from recognition. "Between what?" I asked. She looked at me again, and this time there was something in her expression that felt almost like pity. "Between the breaths," she said. The room seemed to shrink slightly, not physically, but in the way it held sound, as if even the air had become more aware of what was being said. I forced myself to remain steady, to keep my breathing controlled, but the more I focused on it, the more unnatural it became. Each inhale felt delayed, each exhale slightly too long, and I could not shake the feeling that something was adjusting to me in real time. "Can you stop it?" I asked. The woman smiled faintly, and that was the most disturbing thing I had seen since arriving. "No," she said, and then, without warning, her breathing changed. It became perfectly even, perfectly timed, too perfect. The man beside me took a step back. "It has found her rhythm," he said. I did not move because I did not yet understand what that meant, but I was about to. The woman inhaled once more, deeply, calmly, and then she exhaled with a softness that felt almost peaceful. After that, she remained still. Her eyes stayed open, her body upright, but the presence that had been behind her voice was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood there, unable to look away, trying to process what I had just witnessed, but the man beside me spoke before I could form the thought. "It is faster with those who try to control it," he said. I turned to him slowly. "What do you mean?" He met my gaze without hesitation. "You are already trying," he said. The words settled into me with a weight I could not ignore, because he was right, and something else knew it too. I left the house with a sense of urgency that I could not fully explain, because staying inside felt like standing too close to something that had already begun to close in. The air outside should have felt safer, more open, but it did not. If anything, it felt more exposed, as if there was nothing left to shield me from whatever had been quietly observing everything I did. The man did not follow me this time. "You should not move too much now," he said from the doorway. I stopped and turned back toward him. "That does not make any sense," I replied. "It does not need to," he said. "It only needs to be true." I wanted to argue, to push back against the logic that seemed to be slipping further away from anything I could recognize, but the memory of the woman's final breath held me in place. "What happens if I leave?" I asked. The man's expression remained unchanged. "You will still breathe," he said, "and it will still hear you." The simplicity of the answer unsettled me more than anything else he had said so far. "So there is no way out," I said. He hesitated for the first time. "There is a way to delay it," he replied. That was not the answer I wanted. Before I could ask anything further, I felt it again. A shift in the air. Not sudden, not aggressive, but precise, targeted. I froze immediately, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, and for a brief moment, everything felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed just enough for something else to move more clearly. Then I heard it. A breath. Not loud, not distant, but close enough that I could not ignore it. I did not turn. I did not move, because I understood now that reacting would only confirm what it already suspected. The breath came again, softer this time, closer, as if it had stepped forward without making a sound. "You are learning," the voice said quietly. It was the same voice from the night before, but clearer now, more defined, as if it no longer needed to hide itself in the same way. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the empty space ahead of me, refusing to acknowledge what stood behind me. "I am not afraid," I said, though the words felt fragile even as I spoke them. There was a pause. Not long, but intentional. Then I felt it, a breath against my ear. Closer than before, warmer. "You should be," it whispered. My chest tightened instinctively, and I fought the urge to inhale sharply, forcing myself to remain still, to keep my breathing controlled. But the effort itself felt like a signal, something that gave away more than I intended. "It is difficult, is it not?" the voice continued, almost curious. To decide when to breathe. The question was not rhetorical, it was observational, and that was what made it worse, because it was no longer guessing, it was studying. I closed my eyes briefly, focusing on the rhythm I had tried to maintain since the night before, counting each second, measuring each inhale. But the moment I did, I felt it. A change, subtle but undeniable. My breathing was no longer entirely my own. The timing shifted just slightly, just enough that I noticed it, and the realization sent a cold wave through my entire body. "You see," the voice said softly, "you do not need to invite me." I opened my eyes immediately, my composure breaking for the first time since arriving in the village. "You are already making space." The words echoed in my mind, not as sound, but as certainty. And that was when I understood something I had been trying to avoid since the beginning. This was not something I could outrun. It was not something I could fight, because it was not outside of me. It was waiting for the moment I could no longer tell the difference between its breathing and my own. I tried to leave the village that same afternoon, not because I believed I could escape what was happening, but because staying felt like willingly surrendering to something I did not understand. The road I had taken to get here was still visible at the edge of the trees, unchanged, almost inviting, as if nothing had happened at all. That was the first lie. I walked toward it slowly, keeping my breathing shallow, controlled, measured in a way that had already begun to feel unnatural. Every step I took felt deliberate, as if the ground itself was aware of my intention, as if leaving was not simply a physical act, but something that needed permission. When I reached the tree line, I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because something inside me refused to go any further. It was not fear in the way I had known it before. It was not panic nor hesitation. It was something quieter, something deeper, like a boundary I had not agreed to but could not cross. I tried again, forcing myself to take another step forward, but the moment I inhaled, my body locked, completely. I could not move. The air in my lungs felt wrong, too full, too present, as if it did not belong to me anymore. "Do you feel it now?" The voice was not behind me this time. It was inside the breath itself. I did not turn because I understood that there was no direction left to face. "This is where you begin to understand," it continued, calm and patient. My chest tightened, not from lack of air, but from the realization that every breath I took was no longer just a function of my body. It was a signal. "You tried to leave," the voice said. I forced my jaw to move, pushing out the words through a tension I could not fully control. "I am leaving," I said. There was a pause. Then something shifted, not around me, but within me. My next breath came too early, uncontrolled, and I felt it. A second rhythm, layered over my own, not separate, not external, but aligned. "Watching. You are already carrying me," the voice said softly. The words did not echo in the air. They settled directly into my awareness, as if they had always been there, waiting for me to notice. I tried to exhale, to force my body back into something I recognized, but the timing was wrong. The space between my breaths had changed, stretched in a way that felt unfamiliar, like a pattern that no longer belonged to me alone. You cannot leave what has learned you. It continued. My legs finally responded, but not in the way I intended. Instead of stepping forward, I stepped back. One step, then another. Each movement pulling me further away from the forest, further back into the village I had been trying to escape. I fought it, every instinct in my body pushing against the motion. But the more I resisted, the more my breathing faltered, and the moment it did, the pressure inside my chest increased. "Do not resist," the voice said, almost gently. "It is easier when you stop trying." I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to hold my breath, to create a pause that it could not follow, but the silence that followed was worse, because it did not disappear. It waited. Patient. Siftin. And when I finally inhaled again, it inhaled with me. I returned to the village without remembering the exact moment I gave in, and that was what unsettled me the most. There was no clear decision, no point where I consciously chose to stop resisting, but rather a gradual shift, a quiet surrender that happened somewhere between one breath and the next. By the time I reached the center of the village, I was no longer trying to leave. I was trying to understand. The streets were not empty anymore. The villagers were outside, standing in small groups, their movements slow, deliberate, almost synchronized in a way that made them feel less like individuals and more like parts of something larger. They were not speaking to each other, and yet there was no confusion, no hesitation in the way they shifted and adjusted their positions. They were listening, not to sound, but to something else. I stepped closer, careful with my movements, aware of the way my breathing had begun to settle into a rhythm that no longer felt entirely voluntary. Each inhale came at a moment I did not fully choose, and each exhale lingered just long enough to make me question whether I was the one controlling it. One of them turned toward me. Not suddenly, not in reaction, but precisely at the moment I exhaled. The timing was too exact to ignore. "You feel it now," he said, his voice carrying the same hollow calm I had heard before. I did not answer immediately, because I was afraid of what might happen if I spoke without understanding how my own breathing would respond. "It is inside the pause," I said eventually. The man's eyes remained fixed on me, and for the first time, I saw something in them that resembled recognition. "Yes," he replied, "the space between." I swallowed slowly, trying to process the weight of what that meant. "That is where it stays?" I asked. The man shook his head slightly. "That is where it waits," he said. The distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. I felt it again then, not as a voice, not as a presence behind me, but as a pressure, subtle, precise, settled into the exact moment between my inhale and my exhale. I froze, focusing on that space, trying to isolate it, to understand it, but the moment I did, it reacted, it expanded. Not physically, but perceptually, stretching that brief pause into something longer, something deeper, something that did not feel like part of a natural rhythm anymore. "You are looking at it," the man said quietly. "And it is, looking back." The realization hit me harder than anything else had so far. Because this was no longer something hidden, no longer something distant. It was aware of my awareness. "What happens if I stop breathing?" I asked. The question came out before I could stop it. The man did not answer immediately, and when he finally did, his voice was lower than before. "You already tried that," he said. My chest tightened instantly, because he was right. And I remembered the moment in the forest, the silence, the waiting. "It does not need your breath to stay," he continued. "It only needs the moment you create when you try to control it." I felt a cold certainty settle into me. There was no safe way to breathe. Not freely, not carefully, not at all. Because every attempt I made, every adjustment, every moment of awareness was giving it exactly what it needed. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to reset, trying to return to something instinctive, something automatic, but the moment I let go, my breathing changed again. Not violently, not forcefully, but subtly, corrected, aligned, as if something had finally decided how it should be done. I opened my eyes slowly. The villagers were no longer watching me. They were facing forward again, their bodies still, their expressions empty. But I understood now. They were not ignoring me. They had simply stopped needing to look, because whatever was inside them had already found me too. And it was no longer waiting outside. It was waiting for me to stop noticing the difference. I do not know exactly when the moment came where I stopped fighting it, because it did not happen in a single decision, but rather in a series of small concessions that felt harmless at the time. I told myself I would stop paying attention to my breathing, that I would let it return to something natural, something automatic, because the constant awareness had begun to exhaust me in a way I could no longer sustain. At first, it felt like relief. The tension in my chest softened. The tight control I had been forcing began to fade, and for a brief moment, I believed that perhaps this was the answer, that by ignoring it, I could deny it the attention it seemed to respond to. That was the second lie, because the moment I stopped listening to my own breathing, something else took its place. It was not immediate. It did not announce itself, but it was there, subtle, consistent, and perfectly timed. I stood in the center of the village, surrounded by people who no longer needed to look at me to know exactly where I was, and I realized that I could no longer hear the difference between what was mine and what was not. My chest rose, then fell, and for the first time since arriving, I could not tell if I had chosen to do it. "You see," the voice said, but this time it was not separate. It did not come from behind me or around me. It came from within the breath itself, calm, certain you have stopped trying. I did not respond, because there was nothing left to say that had not already been understood. My body felt lighter, not in a comforting way, but in the sense that something had been removed, something I had always assumed was mine to control. "What happens now?" I asked. The question felt distant, as if it had been formed somewhere slightly outside of me. There was a pause, not the kind I had been fearing, but something deeper, something settled. "You remain," it said. The words did not carry threat, they carried finality. I looked around the village at the people who stood in silence, their bodies still, their presence intact, and I understood now that they had not been emptied. They had been adjusted. The man who had spoken to me on my first day stepped forward, his eyes meeting mine with a clarity that had not been there before. "You can hear it now," he said. I nodded slowly. "Yes," I replied, and I meant it, because I could, not as something separate, but as something shared. The boundary that had once existed between my breathing and everything else had dissolved, replaced by a rhythm that extended beyond me, something that connected every person standing in that village in a way that no longer required sight or sound. "We are still here," he said. I looked at him, really looked this time, and I saw it. Not emptiness, not absence, but presence. Just not the kind I had known before. "Yes," I said again, and as the word left me, I felt it align perfectly with the next breath. Not forced, not guided, but correct. I do not know how long it has been since I arrived in this village, because time does not move the same way it used to. The days pass, but not in a way that separates them, and the nights do not bring darkness in the way I remember, because there is always something present, something constant, something that does not rely on light to exist. I still speak, I still think, I still remember who I was before all of this began. But those things feel distant now, like echoes of a version of myself that no longer fully applies to what I have become. And yet, I am still here. That is the part that matters. Because if you are hearing this, then you are still at the beginning. You still notice your breathing. You still believe it belongs to you. And that is why you need to understand what I did not. It does not rush. It does not chase. It does not force itself into you in a way that you can resist. It waits, patiently, quietly, until you begin to listen, until you begin to notice, until you try to control something that was never meant to be controlled. That is when it finds you. Not around you, not behind you, but inside the space you create when you hesitate, when you hold your breath just a little too long, when you inhale just a little too carefully, when you start to wonder if the next breath is yours. I am not telling you this to frighten you. I am telling you this because it is already happening, even now. As you sit there, watching, listening, breathing, you think you are safe because you are not here, because you are not in this village, because this is just a story. That is what I thought too. But the truth is much simpler than that. It does not belong to this place. It never did. It only needed someone to notice it. And now, you have. So before you leave, subscribe, because there are more stories like this, and the next one might explain something I still do not fully understand. And if you felt even the slightest moment where your breathing changed while listening to this, then you already know. It is not waiting for permission. It is waiting for the moment you stop realizing the difference. And when that happens, you will still be here, just like me. If you are still watching this, it means you are still breathing, and it means you still believe that every breath you take belongs to you. But ask yourself one thing, and be honest when you do. Are you the one deciding when you breathe, or did it start to feel different while you were listening? Because the moment you begin to notice it, the moment you become aware of it, something else begins to notice you as well. So before you scroll any further, subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories like this, and the next one might explain what you just felt. And tell me in the comments if your breathing changed, even for a second, because that is where it always begins. It does not rush, and it does not force itself on you. It waits, and once you have felt it, even once, it does not forget you, not ever.